For the central west slopes and plains, fine and mainly sunny, a mild day. Dubbo and Parkes both fine and 24. For the upper western region, fine with high cloud increasing in the west, a mild to warm day. Cobar fine 25, Burke fine and 27.
I'm Jockey Sanderson. I've been coaching and competing for the last 12 years, flying from the tranquil flatlands of Australia to the slightly more stronger conditions of the Alps. I've had many students asking many questions, and since making security in flight, I've definitely noticed there's a need to make another educational video that takes you, the pilot, through all aspects of cross-country flying. Might go over Barra, but depending on the wind direction and strength, hopefully we'll stay over the slightly more hillocky areas, using that line of cloud to go on our big distance.
Be prepared. The worst thing is to go places without knowledge of where you're going, so plan a route, think about where you're getting picked up from, possible areas of where there won't be any roads, tiger country, that sort of thing. Have all your equipment sorted out, make sure all your batteries are charged. The worst thing is 4 hours into an epic day to have your Vario go flat on you or your GPS to go flat. It's always a bastard.
To imagine how the air is flowing around mountains or up valleys, and just think of the water, because water and air move in very similar ways. For example, like here in Bondi Beach, you can see the waves crashing up and over and around these isolated rocks here and accelerating up these narrow little gullies and valleys. That's exactly what the air does. So if you want to imagine what it's doing, if you arrive at a new site and you haven't flown it, then just imagine what the water would be doing, and there you'll get a pretty good idea and picture in your head of where to go and where not to go. When you're flying at thermic sites, it's always good to get to the takeoff early to give yourself time to get your gear ready and relax. And when the conditions become good enough for you to stay up, then you should go. This gives you plenty of time in the air to assess the conditions, as they do change from day to day. Now, I know you can all fly, and I know you can all take off, but there are a few key points that will help you get it right. Because when you're cross-country flying, when you're travelling around the world, you may come to sites like this, which are very tight, very small, quite steep, with a few obstacles around. So you've got to get your takeoff absolutely perfect. So a few tips. First is practice ground handling at home. Don't just think, if it's not flyable, I'm not going to bother getting my glider out. Practice, practice, practice. Try and practice doing the cross-hand launch, which is keeping the right hand in the right brake and the left hand in the left brake, so that when you pull it up, it's all there. You brake it, you keep moving backwards, you turn, the correct hand's in the correct brake, and you go. That minimises the fumbling around and the possibility of having a big front collapse. When you pop it up, make sure it's straight into the wind and you brake, control, keep moving down the hill, especially if the wind is light. Keep the pressure on the glider and move down the hill and take off. If, for some reason, especially on a thermic site, you are taking off and you're taken to the left, then go to the left with it and pull on the right brake, settle it down, allow it to stabilise into wind, and then you'll take off, rather than just fighting it and just crashing into the bushes to the side of the takeoff. Just go with it, swing underneath it, run down the hill and take off.
Prepared, various radios all the time. So when I'm teaching my, competition pilot, at 10 o'clock before sleep, you have to be ready with the batteries and everything, and then in the morning, you no hurry. Myself, my first cross country was, I never thought, or I never planned before. The day was just good feeling, so I was very high. Then, I just fly. I thought I should go there, and then I went there. Then I take down the thermals, and then I climb. And then I looked the other place, and I say, oh, that looks good. So I went there. That was my first flying. So I think the cross country comes by chance, the first cross country. So you need to always be ready to fly, and then no need to plan big distance for the first cross country.
The important thing to do after taking off is take off and do your first leg into wind, if there is a into wind leg. And from here there was an into wind leg coming from the left. So as soon as you take off, go left, go into wind. It gives yourself a slower ground speed, and therefore if anything was to go wrong, then you're not going very fast before you touch down on the slope again. So it's always good. It gives you time to sort of get into your harness, relax, chill out and get used to the day. So now we're just soaring in front of a takeoff. The air's coming up, thermals are working good, there's nice cumulus out in the flatlands. Things are looking very nice today. So we're just cruising up and down the ridge, soaring in the gentle dynamic flow of the air as it is deflected up the ridge, up the hill. Now what we'll do is we'll hook the cores that come up these bowls here. Here's one, so we'll do a nice turn round to the left. You can bury the brake in the core because it's good to turn in the lift section so that you maximise the efficiency of the soaring beat. Okay, now as I come towards the hill, you always want to be weight shifting slightly away so that if anything does go wrong, deflations, whatever, you're immediately weight shifting away from danger, which is the hill.
Early in the day, or when the lift is weak, you must be prepared to get in close to the hill to make the most out of any air that's going up, elegantly banking on the hard lift sections and then easing it off as you drop back into your next soaring beat.
See, this hill is very good example of a flat top mountain. It has a flat top, so the thermal is actually coming up the face, dripping off the crest of the hill, the edge of the hill, dripping off. So the thermal sort of column goes up like that. And if you had a lee side thermal on the other side, the thermal will come up this side. So in the middle, at the top of the hill, you have a triangle of dead air. So you always want to avoid that, because what happens if people are concentrating too much on trying to circle in the lift? They circle, go over the back of the flat top too low, get in the sort of dead air, and end up top landing again. So it's always important to sort of do a running track shaped thermal when you're low in front of a launch or in front of a flat mountain. So what you do is you point into wind, you use the lift, turn, go downwind, quickly turn back into wind, use the lift into wind, turn, quickly into wind. By doing that, you stay in the column of lift and you don't get circled back onto the flat top and have to land.
Often you find better lift upwind. This means that if you're flying in a thermal, you've no idea where the best part of the thermal is. If in doubt, you just head back upwind. And the reason behind this is that thermals drift downwind. So if you have, say, a hot rock which is producing a thermal or a field, the strong thermals will climb very quickly and the weak thermals will get drifted by the wind. So if you're thermaling in a weak thermal, if you go upwind, then you hit the stronger one because it gets drifted less by the wind. So search upwind is a very, very good piece of advice.
When there's thermals in both the flatlands and on the hill, you have to make the decision to cut out if it's not working on the hill. So if it's very flat and very sinky on the hillside, it's normally because the air is being drawn into the flatlands where it's actually lifting. So if you arrive at a hill and there's not much doing, then have a look out in the flats and see if the thermal is releasing, normally from the trigger point, which will be the flatlands, and then a tree line, and that's where it releases, which is just in front of the hill itself. So we're now going on a glide straight. We're in sync now, but we're going straight towards a thermal that we know is working because we can see another pilot is thermaling in it.
If you do find yourself low in a more stable, warm valley breeze, then fly downwind over a source, for example a ploughed field. And if you hit lift, turn back into wind and hold that for a few seconds, and then quickly turn back downwind and quickly back into wind again, holding it and then turning again. Keep doing that running track shape 360 and allow yourself to be drifted off the source as the thermal goes downwind over other smaller thermals. Soon it will gather momentum and trigger from buildings, for example. As the thermal is then pushed up into the cooler, calmer air, then it rises faster and your downwind legs are not so sinky and it's constant lift all the way around in your 360. Stay in the 360, coring the thermal well all the way to base.
Getting better now. Here we are. This is good. Pilot's going to the left, so I'm going to go to the left too. Lasted for a good 4 seconds, so I'll turn around in this one.
As a basic rule of thumb, whenever you enter lift, wait 4 seconds and then turn, because that's the time it takes you to do a full 360 and stay in the lift section. Thermaling isn't just about doing 360s. You often have to fly straight for a while or do 180-degree turns just to stay in the best section of lift.
Good core here, so I'm flattening out, centering on the core, that's nice, and I'll turn again. I felt my wing drop quite heavily on the right side, which means I'm very close to the edge of the thermal on that right side, which is about there now. So I just fly straight a bit away from where that sink was, so the next time I do a 360, now I won't hit that sinky edge. It's always important to fly away from the sinky areas as much as it is important to fly into the lifty areas. So always note when you're doing your 360, if there's a section of the 360 that is actually in sync, then just turn away from it, fly straight for a few seconds, and then turn again. And that way you always tighten up on the best part of the lift and avoid the sink.
I sort of changing every time my directions in thermals, keep the bank and then try to stay in the lift, and I normally so much concentrate to listen to my value. So I always changing the where lift is. If the sounds come down, I changing the direction. So then I don't really turns as a 360. My turn is sort of really like how you say that, all the times changing. So then kind of I try to follow the thermal. So most of people just want to 360 in the thermal, but it's not true really. You just have to change all the time your angle, so you have to work a lot to stay in the lift. So for me, it's very important to keep the distensions and then really with the vario.
You can see our pal that we're flying with here. He's the guy that showed me where the lift was. So you show a bit of etiquette in the thermal by arriving and obviously going the same way he is, but more importantly, you join the thermal, you join his circle on the outside of his circle. That way it says that yes, I've seen you, I'm going to avoid you by going on the outside, and we'll use this thermal together. If you fly straight at the centre of the thermal and the centre of his turn, then he doesn't know whether he's seen you. He'll probably have to fly away from the lift, and therefore he'll be pretty angry with you, and so it destroys his day, pretty much destroys yours.
You should never leave lift unless you can see it's going up better somewhere else and within a glide to you, and if that's the case, then get over there as fast as possible. The secret of going up is not worrying about going down.
Okay, so we're now approaching the sunny area. We've got quite a lot of shade to our right, so we're avoiding that place, and we're going more for the sort of sun. Now there's a nice brown ploughed field surrounded by green fields and grass, so the contrast in both temperature and texture is there. We've got dry dirt surrounded by moist, cool grass, so immediately that's a perfect place for a thermal source to start. Now here we are, we're above it, we've hit a core, so we're going to turn.
My rule in general is when I first hit a thermal, if it's a reasonably strong core, then I try to turn quite quickly, because I find that if it's worse to fall out the other side of it than to not have quite hit the core, but the next time round you know that you can go a bit wider and enter more into the core. So that's a rule of thumb that I normally have. If it's a weaker thermal, then I tend to maybe stay a little bit longer, because it's more difficult to know exactly where the core is, and it's less important if you fall out of it.
If you lose the core, then flatten out the turn, keeping the 360 nice and wide. That way you'll increase your search area and stand a better chance of finding the lift again.
Today we can see we've got some nice wide smooth thermals, but within those big areas of lift, you're going to find yourself going through some smaller cores. Now it is important to hook yourself into those cores because that's where the air is going up fastest. So although you've got a bigger angle of bank, tighter, you will be going up much quicker. So to hook those cores is crucial. Now if someone is in front of you going around on a nice lazy 360 and you see them going up and down, it means they've just gone through a core. So as you go into it, then hook it, let the nose drop, get some speed on, bank it in and turn and stay in the core. As long as you go around the same way as the other guy in front of you, by the time he comes around and could possibly have a collision, you'll be up past him anyway, and therefore you'd have avoided a collision. So it is okay to turn tighter on stronger pieces of lift if the other guy hasn't taken it. But do remember etiquette. If you are going around and you think that it's going to be too tight and too much of a squeeze and you're going to push him out of the thermal, then obviously don't do it. Make sure that you, before you take the core, take a look to your left, make sure you've got the space and turn and take it, because taking the cores gets you up much faster and therefore you go further.
For me, San André is one of the best and most challenging places to fly. But if you do arrive at a thermic site for the first time, always talk to local pilots because they know the best and safest routes to take.
The idea is to keep it as smooth as possible, as if the glider's flying on rails. You want to keep it very, very elegant. You don't want to be sort of tumbling all over the place. And so what you want to do is you can keep tight angle of bank, that's not a problem, but keep it smooth and efficient. If you're rolling backwards and forwards, then you're losing the efficiency of your sink rate, you're losing the efficiency of your bank, and therefore your vario is not giving you good information and you won't use the thermal very well at all.
Trying to go as far as possible or as fast as possible, then yeah, very often in the first thermal of the day you can tell if there's an inversion at certain heights or how strong the thermals are likely to be for the rest of the day. And so then, yeah, you can set at least a baseline of how high I'm going to go, what minimum strength I'm going to stay in the thermals and things like that. But obviously, have to afterwards always have to adapt that according to how the day changes or how the conditions change during the day. But it's certainly possible in the first thermal of the day to set some criteria for the day, for the flight.
If we do hit an inversion, what will happen is the thermal, which is a steady sort of 2 to 3 up, will slow down to a sort of 0, 1 up, and it'll be pretty average. Now if we want to break through that, we've got to be very patient. So we have to just chill out and stay in it, 0s and 1s, and hopefully we'll break through the inversion and go to base. Because we know the cloud is going through that inversion, the thermal is going through that inversion because it's forming a cloud up there. So it's worth being patient if you've got no other choice.
The fourth thermaling, you fly after takeoff. 30 minutes for me is just time for just look, understand weather.
Concentration is crucial in cross-country flying. Most people think it's the lack of thermal experience that actually puts them down on the ground prematurely, when in fact it's concentration.
when you're starting to find lift, when you're low, you're focusing your mind, you're concentrating quite hard. But as you get set up in this thermal and you're going up quite smoothly, then take time off and relax. When you're on glides, after you've decided exactly where to go to get your next climb, take time off as well. We can only concentrate for 20 minutes in an hour. So if you try too hard to concentrate, you burn yourself out, and therefore you make silly decisions and you land early. Before your flight, don't drink Coca-Cola or have coffee because it makes you gag for a pee. If you can pee in the air, then all well and good. If you can't, then it's going to make you very uncomfortable, and therefore, because you're in pain and uncomfortable, you'll start to make silly mistakes and you'll land way before you should. So water, fruit during your flight will help you make good decisions, keep your mind active, and help you make the most out of your cross-country flight.
Once you've found the next piece of lift to go to and you're on your glide, it's good to eat muesli bars or mixed nuts and raisins, for example, as they give you a slow induction of sugar and therefore more energy, and it also forces you to think about something else and give your mind a chance to rest.
It's important to stay in the lift, for sure. To turn tight on the strong lift is always the best way. But if you turn too tight and have too much brake and too little monitoring brake on the outside, then you're diving the leading edge into the ground and you just sort of end up doing a tight 360 stroke spiral, and you're not making the most out of the lift. You can actually turn right on your wingtip by applying quite a bit of right brake or left brake, whichever you're turning to, and you're monitoring it with the outside brake. So what I'm doing here, you'll see I'm just holding on to the webbing so that my arm doesn't get too tired, and I'm monitoring the angle of my bank with my left brake. So if I want to turn a bit flatter, I'll pull on this brake, or if I want to straighten up into a lift section, or if I want to turn a bit tighter in the core, then I'll ease it off a bit. But this one always remains pretty constant, unless it's a real good core and I really want to crank it around and fight that core that's pushing me out and I've got to bury the brake and get stuck in. But if it's a gentle average climb like this, I just lock my right hand on or inside brake and just monitor it with the outside. That way I won't get too exhausted, and I can make the most of all my energy and fly very far. Knowing your turning circle of your glider, knowing how much you can actually bend it round on a wingtip is important, because the time it takes you to take a 360, for example, is if you've got a good steady angle of bank, it's about 8 to 10 seconds or so, and you'll cover quite a sort of gentle arc. You can actually, if you're really cranked round in a thermal, go right the way around, keeping your wingtip pretty much central, so you can turn in a very small section of lift. Knowing all this helps you visualize how big and wide the thermal is, or how small and tight it is. So by knowing my position, how long it'll take me to get around half a 360, helps me visualize where I am in relation to the column of lift. Just approaching 4,000 feet. Now from takeoff to 4,000 feet, the climb was very nice. It was very steady, 300 feet a minute climbs, very smooth indeed. But you've always got to make sure that on your first thermal you plot where the strongest section of the lift is and where the weakest section of the lift is in that first column of lift. That way you know exactly at which point the thermal is the strongest, and therefore your climb will be quickest, and which point it's slowest. Because if you want to fly fast, the key tip is to get to base and then fly down to the bottom of where the section of lift is the strongest. So for example, if the lift here starts to peter out at 3,000 feet as it goes through a gentle inversion and then gets better at 3,500, and then I go to 6,000 feet cloud base, then I'll want my glides to be from cloud base to 3,500 feet, which is at the bottom of the strongest section of lift, so that I can maximise the strong lift section, get to base and go again. That's the speed to fly.
Sometimes people get very worried when the air is very strong and very punchy and there's some good cause. Turn that fear into excitement, turn the negative into the positive and get stuck into it. If it's going up strong, it means it's good. So you have to get stuck in, tighten on the core. By tightening up on the core and finding the lift, you're concentrating on something good, which is going up. By tightening on the core, you actually are loading the wing up more with weight, centrifugal force and weight, and therefore it's less likely to collapse. And there, in general, you have a better time of it. If you sort of dwell on the having deflations, you generally find yourself being pushed out of the thermal into the rough air, and you have a bad time. So it's important to get stuck in and enjoy it. A way of dealing with this is when it's really rough, you sort of give out a laugh. I know I sort of give a little scream or so and a laugh because you're sort of laughing in the face of danger. And it's exciting. You suddenly think, whoa, it's exciting. The same sort of laughter that you have on a roller coaster ride. You're nervous, but you know you're safe really, so just get stuck in and laugh with it. And it generally turns your negative feelings into positive, and it makes you enjoy the flight more. Got a sailplane there behind us, look. So we're sailing away with a sailplane. I don't know if you can see that just behind me. Maybe you can.
If you do find yourself in a particularly rough thermal and you're feeling quite nervous, then it's always good to think about where the next piece of lift is coming from, because it forces you to think about something more positive. And remember, you can always fly away into the calmer air and then chill out. And if you feel good, you can always come back, have another go at another thermal.
So I normally say just feel comfort in the air. I mean, if you don't feel you want to go, you just go land. So this is my kind of motto to say my pilot.
It's good to have pressure because it increases your performance. But if you pile on too much pressure and try and fly in conditions that are far too strong for you, then you lose the performance and therefore you don't enjoy the flight. So it's important to fly within your flight envelope, be comfortable and set yourself realistic goals.
It's not good to be scared. Be scared?
Be scared.
Be scared. Not good to be stuck. It's better to attack, to have a security in the decisions and to fly in front is good. Flying with other pilots is best, no? Flying groups, 2 or 3 pilots, but attacking.
I think I deal with pressure by having a very short memory. I'm a bit like a goldfish. Have something nasty that happens to me, 30 seconds later I've forgotten about it, so it helps a lot.
Deep breathe and put here all power and then concentrate. I'm ready.
Attack. Yeah. Que ataque. Bueno, vamos al ataque ahora entonces.
We're establishing our 360. So's the sailplane, just wave at him, hello there. Just behind us now. Gave me a nice wave. Probably thinks we're mad up here. Now we've approached base. Now it's important not to go into base out of the cloud, in the centre of the cloud. So what you do is you use your last 360 to fly straight in the direction you want to go, so that as you're flying straight you actually go up and up and up through the centre of the lift, so by the time you get to base itself you're right on the edge of the cloud in the way, the direction you want to be going, and then you're off. You don't go into the cloud and then have to big ear and speed bar out, losing time, losing altitude before you go to your next climb.
Although it can sometimes look menacing, flying at base is often the smoothest place you'll be. If you do think your cloud is getting a bit big, then look at the surrounding clouds, and if they're okay, then yours probably will be too.
I think probably my favourite area and favourite place, though, everywhere is Valadares in Brazil, because it's for me it's not the strongest conditions. It's not the most fantastic. You're not going to go the furthest distance, but it's just so nice to be able to fly in a t-shirt and shorts and be warm enough at cloud base and be able to fly almost every day and just have lovely flying. And for me, it's just fantastic.
My name is Raúl Rodríguez from Spain. It's inverted spiral. There is something like a negative, but it's really close to the negative, but it's a spiral. The glider is flying in positive, and I go in negative, and it's just like a spiral, but chain, you know? I be the center and the glider is just outside and turning.
As we leave the thermal and the cloud, we're obviously going to be in some sinking air because the air's going up and rotating round. You just have to bear with that and just keep going.
You'll also be in a headwind as the air is drawn back into the thermal that you just left. Once free of its draw, then you'll get a better ground speed, which increases again as you start to arrive at the next cloud.
Now, to see if a cloud is working or not, a good sort of rule of thumb image of a cloud is that if it's forming, it'll have a dark base, a good defined sides, and it will have sort of a triangular shape to it. So there's the base and it goes up like that. That's a good forming cloud. A decaying cloud is an upside down triangle. It's decayed the base and all the edges are wispy and it doesn't really form a nice defined triangle that way. So that's good, that's bad. If you're going into wind and you hit sections of lift when you're on a speed bar, it's smooth lift, then you put your speed bar on more, and then if you go through the sink, the other side of it, you ease it off. That way, by going into lift, you accelerate a bit, you pitch the nose down, and so it keeps it flat, and then when you go into sink, you ease it off, and therefore you keep it flat as well. So you end up just keeping it flat. Your objective is to get the glider to fly as flat as possible.
Welcome to Mexico.
Here we are in Valle de Bravo, Mexico, to talk about competition flying.
The window is going to be open at 11:30 and closed at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Competitions are a great way to learn about cross-country flying, as it encourages you to thermal fast and be decisive in a safe and challenging environment, sharing and learning from the experiences you have with your fellow pilots. But you must remember to serve your apprenticeship and set yourself realistic goals, putting everything you've just learned into the next competition you do. It's good to have discipline and routine so that you're prepared and are able to wind down on the launch. Study the turn point photos and maps well and visualise yourself flying the task, drawing in turn point sectors and 5 and 10k radiuses from goal. The more time you put in on the ground, the more time it leaves you free to concentrate on flying during the task.
I managed to be very consistent in competitions, And that, I think, is a lot because I've been flying for such a long time. I've been flying for 26 years now, and the experience that I've gathered over all those years just makes it relatively easy for me to be able to fly the same way every day, or to fly the same way all the time, and that leaves my brain free to think about the particular tactics for the day or whatever.
One thing I think is the most important to begin to have success in competition is to be patient.
Yeah, I think patience is really important in competition and cross-country flying. But it's important to know how to fly fast, but to know as well that sometimes you have to slow right down and stop everything because the conditions are not as good, or they've changed, or whatever, or there's a big obstacle in front that you've got to find some way to get around. And I think that's for sure one of my strong points. And it's the never say die attitude that helps a lot sometimes. So.
You know, I used to think flying fast was in the paragliding, a speed bar, leaving low, flying very low all the time. But now I believe it's just not getting stuck. I mean, if you do an entire flight without getting stuck, you'll always be very close to the leaders, even if they are flying with more speed bar on. So it's just assessing the conditions, deciding, you know, how high you need to go. If there's a cloud street, you know, you don't need to go as high, you can fly underneath it straight. If there's nothing, you know, flying fast might just mean waiting in a spot, taking it easy, and you know, I mean, there's just so many things about it. But I think just fly conservatively and just don't waste time. You know, if you're at the top of a thermal, go if it looks good.
It's important to be decisive and view competitors as lift markers and equals, not as pilots that are better than you. Never keep looking up at the other pilots, as it tells you very little and only winds you up. And believe you're a good pilot and trust in your decisions, because that's why you're there.
When you decide, okay, I'm going to decide, and you look at other people climbing up at the right, you begin, no, right, left. This is very bad. It's important to decide, I go to this mountain or wherever you are decide, but no changing the decisions. I think the first two steps, to be patient and to not be indecisions. Cool. And to learn English more.
The sort of cornerstones of my cross-country philosophy, at least for new pilots, are get nice and high, stick with whatever lift you find, knowing that you can't get high enough, and then when it's time to head off on glide, go straight and only straight until you run into a substantial thermal and don't turn in anything that's not big.
¿Qué ataque? Bueno, vamos al ataque ahora entonces.
For me, the most important thing about cross-country is to be able to gear up and gear down for the conditions during the day. When it's strong and fast, then you fly aggressively, but when it's weak and smooth, then you calm down and chill. Flying fast and doing big distances is all about knowing when to speed up and when to slow down.
So here we are, we just landed on this landing field, and the kids came running out with these windsocks, kiddie-made windsocks, bits of plastic. They were just standing there holding them up so that we could actually see the wind direction for our approach and landing, which is fantastically accommodating and so typically Mexican. They're really kind, really lovely little kids. And this is just part of the cross-country flight. I find this is often the best part. The decision-making, the speed to fly is fine, but when you land, the adventure begins. You meet all these kids, you meet different cultures, and then you've got a hitch to get back, all sorts of things. So don't just think of cross-country flying as just the flight. It's also the retrieve and the meeting of other people. But remember, we're ambassadors for our sport. So be polite, be nice to people. Because if someone lands after you and you've been rude, you won't get such a warm welcome.
Welcome to Turkey. Türkiye'ye hoş geldiniz.
When flying cross-country, you may find yourself in beautiful and remote parts of the world like this, where the emergency services are there but are rare. So when you arrive, make sure you find the number of the nearest or best private hospital and also the number of the nearest helicopter emergency services, so that if an accident does happen, you're already prepared and you can call them immediately so they can get to the casualty as fast as possible.
If you do see a downed pilot, then keep your cool and don't rush down there, as the air is likely to be very turbulent. Stay high if possible, circling above him, assessing the pilot's condition and also position. Once you know this, then get on the radio to retrieve or other pilots on the ground. Once they've confirmed the information and are on their way, then you can start to find a safe place to land. If you are that pilot on the ground and you are okay, then make sure you move around and you ball your glider up if you possibly can, so that it indicates to the pilots above you that you are okay and there's no problem. When you fly in thermals, you may find yourself having a few collapses. It's important to prioritise the situation and not to overreact. If you're in lift and you're going up and you have a collapse, then just keep the turn on, stay in the 360, and when you're ready, just pump it out. There are three main rules of glider control. The first is course correction. If you have a collapse and it takes you into the deflation, then use the energy of that dive to roll yourself away, getting onto a steady course, and then pump out the collapse. And second, if your glider really dives forwards, then brake that dive as much as you can. But the moment you start to swing underneath the glider, then ease off the brakes, let it climb out, gently dive again, and then fly away. And finally, if all hell's broken loose and your glider's all over the place and you really just don't know what to do, then ease off the brakes and let the glider dive forwards, braking again to keep that dive in check. But as soon as you swing underneath, gently ease off the brakes again and let it just fly away.
"5 o'clock syndrome," it's just a little catchphrase we use for when we get a lot of visiting pilots here or pilots that haven't flown big cross countries before. And the biggest problem they have is they get to around about 5 o'clock when the day changes. It changes from being a booming day to a light day around about that time of the day. Maybe the cloud streets start decaying and everything they've experienced up until that point in their cross country on that flight suddenly changes. Well, not suddenly, but it's a gradual progression, but they fail to notice it, so the next minute they're on a big glide and suddenly that thermal that they thought should be under that cloud isn't there. They've got to completely change the way they think when they're flying. So we get probably 80% of pilots decking it around 5 o'clock, give or take half an hour, on really good days where they could have carried on till 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And it's purely because they haven't changed their thinking.
Hey,
hello.
Yo.
Judging by each 90-degree turn, we can see exactly what the wind strength is and which direction it's coming from. So once we know that, then we set ourselves up on the edge, on the boundary of the field, over the obstacles, i.e. tree lines or power lines. That way we know we'll never hit them. So we're using the tree line, the hedge line of the field, to do our base legs. So we lose our height, never turning more than 90 degrees away from the landing field, always keeping an eye on where you want to land, and then finally turning in to do small judging, correctional steering into land. Tard flare.
Kiss the ground now.
So here are the bullet points on retrieve driving. First, have a good detailed briefing with the driver and the pilots so that they know exactly which direction you plan to go. Second, make sure that they all have the right radio frequency and also retrieve or stroke emergency telephone numbers. Make sure the information to the retrieve driver is clear and succinct. Once you've landed,
make sure you get your glider to the road as fast as possible. You make sure it's put into a clear place that they can see from the road. If you do get an offer of a lift back, then don't take it unless you have got confirmation from the driver that you are going back with somebody else.
All good.
Yeah, 120 kilometers. All right.
The most important thing is the feeling in the air, general feeling. If you feel comfort, that's the things. ,90% of my testing time is in mountains with my pilot, of course, because the most important thing for the glider is the general feeling in the air. You have to feel very comfort, then the glider will be no problem. And then what I learned, the glider which is very comfort flying in the air shows no problem in the maneuver as well. It's more important you to fly in practical conditions. Some glider you fly like that, a lot of pitch up and down, so you don't really glide. And some glider flies really cutting through the air. That's the good one. So when you want to choose a glider, you have to choose the glider which is cutting through air more. That's more glide than, you have a lot of pitch momentum. Normally, if you fly too less weight, then all the maneuvers is like recovering tendency is slow also. But if you weigh too much, then all the reaction becomes too fast. So you always have to fly in the kind of tolerance. Before, a lot of pilots open harness this much to make a really big, things like that. But while for good pilot, that's fine. But for the weekend pilot, should fly the distance which manufacturer recommend. That's all the maneuver tests done. If you open much bigger, or if you open very tight, that can it cause big trouble. For example, when you make big spiral, if you close as much as you can stay very, very, stable spiral, very high speed. Sometimes it accelerates even speed after you release. A streamlined harness will improve your performance a lot because of air drag is drag is much less. It's better to fly intermediate glider 100% rather than compression glider 60% or 50%.
for me, the fly is one sport very interesting and very spiritual, and the competition is the way to training and to learn how to fly better, and for me it's the way to enjoy the life.
For me, cross-country flying is like three-dimensional chess. It's the ultimate man versus nature mind game, and every cross-country flight is a mystery flight because you don't know where you're going to end up unless you set a declared goal. But even then, you don't know how the flight's going to pan out. Even though you might be looking ahead at 50 kilometres down track, you certainly can't say for sure what the next thermal will be like, and that's what really gets me going.
Well, we couldn't come to Australia without visiting Stanwell Park. It's not a major cross-country site, but it certainly is one of the most historical. You can fly with good conditions about 50 kilometres to the south and about 15 to 20 kilometres to the north. But what's more important here is the fact that you can just use the smooth air to relax, get used to your kit, and also fly with your mates, because it's important to just relax and unwind. Just like in cross-country flying, you've got to relax and you've got to remember why you're there, because you enjoy it. In fact, we've enjoyed it so much today that we've missed that perfect orange sunset shot, and we've had to shoot in absolute darkness. But well, flying's a bit more important than filming sometimes. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this cross-country video. Just make sure that whenever you fly, you learn from every single experience you have and you put it to good use the next time you fly. But remember, the best pilot's the one having the most fun.
we are at Bitteruna. Olu said his fucking snake on Bitteruna.
Come on, man. Get
Sorry. Okay, ready?
Oh, hang on.
Welcome to Lift 10. As you are aware, we are in Lift 0.
Sound alright?